with Houndstooth, is that right? Now, are you a graduate or a current member of the class?
Graduate of Team Leadership, current class of.
So at Fayetteville, we're very proud of our leadership programs. We have both teen leadership and adult. So John says he is a graduate of the teen leadership program and now has graduated up to the adult leadership program as a member of that. So tonight is an opportunity for him to get his hands sort of on the process of what's going on in community civic government. Well, okay, I will give each candidate an opportunity to do a 2-minute opening, and then we'll have questions and answers, and they'll have up to 2 minutes to answer each question. I always like to make sure the candidates understand it's up to 2 minutes. If I happen to ask you a yes or no question, just say yes or no, and we won't waste all that whole 2 minutes. When you get down to 30 seconds left, John will hold up the yellow card, and of course, when your time is up, it'll be read. Please do not stop a thought or a sentence in the middle. Finish what you're saying, and he'll keep the red card up, but that is not to do anything other than just let you know that you're pretty close on time. We will appreciate that. Okay. I always promise there are no gotcha questions here. There may be a couple that make our candidates a little uncomfortable, but we're not here to get you. We're here to help you communicate the facts and where you stand on these issues to the folks that are involved. So there will be links, I said, at the library and the chamber. So let's begin with a quick description for the folks that are either in the audience here or listening by live stream. The city of Fayetteville operates under a mayor-council form of government. In this system, the city council is the legislative and policy-making body of city government. The Fayetteville City Council sets city policy by passing ordinances and resolutions. The council also determines the city budget and appoints and removes certain board, committee, and commission members. So if you need to locate your ward and your city council members in order to vote after you've gotten informed today and then you want to vote, just pull up your Fayetteville address, go to My Fayetteville Services, type in an address. It should bring up the individual who is your ward representative. So these gentlemen are running for the position in Ward 2, and they are Mike Wiedeker and Jesse Buchanan. Jesse's nearest me, Mike is over there. Gentlemen, are you ready?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. We're going to start with our opening statements, and we'll go alphabetical. So I would ask if you would allow me to call you by first name throughout this event. It'll make it a little bit simpler and also make people bond with us a little bit better. So, Jesse, your opening statement.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Jesse Buchanan. I grew up in the state of Arkansas with 2 public school teachers for my parents, and from them I learned the value of working hard, cultivating community, and investing in the future, which is why I also became a public school teacher. After graduating from Harding University in 2020, I moved to Fayetteville so that I could be a teacher at Fayetteville High School, where I teach geometry now. I moved here because I know what it's like to feel excluded as a queer person in Arkansas, and I knew that Fayetteville was a city where I could be fully myself and still belong. I've been teaching at Fayetteville High for 4 years now, and in that time, I've seen students who struggle with unmet needs outside of the classroom that affect their ability to learn. And because of the patterns that I've seen and the things that I've watched unfold in their lives, I felt like being a teacher is not enough. So I've joined the Fayetteville GSA. I try to invite my students and be a welcoming and encouraging presence on campus. But even that, still not enough. So I started looking for ways outside of the school to engage with the community and support our young families and our children. I joined a nonprofit that focuses on providing housing and services to young trans and queer people in the city of Fayetteville. And once again, I saw what it was like for people who don't have their basic needs met, especially our most vulnerable populations who are struggling intensely with a lack of adequate housing that they can afford. After that, I started searching for where are the policy decisions being made. And so I started participating in citizen-led initiatives to draft policy and bring resolutions forward to the city council. And through that, I've learned a lot about the process of drafting resolutions. I've learned a lot about the collaboration and work required to bring forward thoughtful, helpful policy that has a positive effect on the lives of the people that it touches. And so I'm running for city council because I have a hope and a vision for Fayetteville. And I believe that my neighbors do too. And I really look forward to working with the citizens of Fayetteville to bring forward a future for all generations to come that provides a safe accessible, and affordable place to live.
Thank you. Mike?
Thank you. I should thank the Chamber for hosting this, for everyone for coming out tonight. It's an important part of our democracy. As uncomfortable as it is for us up here, it's the right thing to do, so thank you. I'm born and raised in Fort Smith, Arkansas. Had the opportunity to go to school at Loyola New Orleans, do some graduate work at the University of North Texas in industrial organizational psychology, and got hired by the city of Fort Worth, Texas. And that's when my municipal career began. And so I worked in their HR department. And it was eye-opening because I was literally working for a court-appointed monitor for the city. From there, you know, the city of Glendale, California called and offered a job. I had 3 children and thought, where the hell is Glendale, California? And so they said, well, we're between the Rose Bowl and the Johnny Carson show. And so we went west, and I told the kids 3 years and we'll move back. Oil was less than $15 a barrel and had devastated the economy of Texas at the time. So I got an additional 5 years in HR at the city of Glendale, and then moved to economic development, where I worked on the entitlement side of the table, helping businesses get large projects through the entitlement process, and through that learned the city's permitting process. Lo and behold, I was involuntarily transferred from that side of the table to the enforcement side of the table, and headed up building and safety for 13 years. At the end of 13 years, the city called and said, gee, we forgot we sent you there. You've served your duty. And I spent the last 10 years, 5 in sanitation and 5 in public works administration. But if you ask me, what did I really do? What's your specialty? It was unhappy people. And whether that was employees or residents. And so I naturally, when we, in 2017, after 2 years of research, decided to move to Fayetteville, Arkansas for the quality of life that was available here, we moved back, and I just began to volunteer. So I volunteered for the Environmental Action Committee. Councilmember Turk is in the audience and serves on that committee. And then on the Planning Commission. And then I was on the Washington County Historical Society Board for 3 years. And then when Mr. Petty resigned his seat, I ran for that open seat in the special election. So I'm 2.5 years into a 3-year term, and my specialty is still unhappy people. And despite Fayetteville, why would you want to live anywhere else? It's a great place to be.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, gentlemen, thanks for letting us know a little bit about you. So, do we have a housing crisis? That's a yes or no from both of you.
Yes.
I think it's safe to say the nation does.
And our newspaper has declared it so, and I think our city council has as well, because they've appointed a housing crisis task force. So we're going to start out the evening talking a bit about our entire housing scenario. Most of the people that we've heard from at the chamber in our polling and our membership requests is, yes, we have a crisis and we need to do something about it. So first question, this goes to you, Jesse, first. Is the crisis mainly one of shortage or affordability, in your opinion?
All right. As a renter in the city, I would say that both of those are issues that our renting market is facing. I think there is a lack of housing, but there's specifically a lack of affordable housing for the average renter in the city of Fayetteville. I'm a full-time employee at the public school. I make a good salary, and I have 3 roommates, and all 4 of us would be very hard-pressed to afford a place to live in Ward 2 without each other. And that's not because there's no apartments in Ward 2. There's a lot of apartment buildings. There's a lot of houses in Ward 2. But specifically to be able to find housing at every income level is something that our citizens seem to be struggling with. I've talked to several people who own businesses even in Ward 2 who've said that within the last few months, their landlords have increased rent by over 50%. Said that when their lease is up, they're going to have to pay $500 more a month. And these are people who are building part of the economy locally. They've built businesses in Ward 2, and they don't know if they can live here anymore. And so I think, yes, affordability is largely a big part of this, and I think a lot of that is driven by corporate-owned land and corporate-owned housing projects. But I would like to see more housing available as well so that we can maybe distribute the opportunity available within the market as well.
Ike?
The affordability is simply a function of the availability. And so it's if you call it a commodity, it's in such short supply that in fact demand is really impacting what prices are going to be. If you look at the United States as a nation, we're about 4 million houses short of what we actually need. And it began after the 1970s. So in the 1980s, if you look at the amount of money we as a society set aside for affordable housing today, based on inflation, we're spending a third as much as we spent in the 70s. So the 80s was one of the first big downturns. Then when you look at 2008, the whole implosion of the subprime mortgage, I used to say Fayetteville stopped developing housing for 3 years, and then I looked and thought it's closer to 5. And when you really look at the data, we didn't get back to normal production for a decade. So that was the second big hit to our supply. And then the third is the pandemic. And that impacted both labor and material availability. And so today, unless there's a significant subsidization somewhere along the way, whether that's going to be materials or land, you can't subsidize labor. You've got to pay labor if you want it because someone else will retain them. Then you're not going to build anything that mathematically meets the definition of affordable. You're going to have to literally increase supply and allow the market to adjust to additional housing. But that's a tough nut.
Okay, thank you. The Housing Crisis Task Force has met several times. As a matter of fact, they've been meeting for some time, and they recently went over some initial ideas that they had to encourage housing affordability. I hope both of you saw that. But just to refresh your memory and our audience, just going to hit a few of these ideas that they have. They said the city could encourage landlords to provide alternative deposit options to tenants. Some of these things are going to resonate with you, Jesse. Landlords could share the deposits they pay for utilities with their tenants. The city could provide the paperwork, it says here. Developers could have the option to hire their own inspectors to submit reports to the city instead of waiting on city inspectors. Here's one. The city could allow developers to get estimates on requirements such as sidewalks, street improvements, and pay the amount to the city for future installation. So you can see they were digging down. They were getting below some of the surface issues. They mentioned that impact fees should be more reflective of the size and scale of residential projects and subsequent use of city resources, the relationship between the developer and the city. And they also heard that, I think everybody may like to hear this one, building permitting should be streamlined and expedited. I think if we took a show of hands on that one, we wouldn't have any opposition. They talked about reducing residential parking minimums, and one of our other questions may get you into that one, much like the city already does for commercial projects. So they are doing their job. They're on the job, and the article indicated they were given 1 year to come up with recommendations to give to the city council. So I'll ask you another yes/no question. Are you optimistic that they will be able to come to satisfactory solution with suggestions that we can implement within 1 year?
I would say absolutely yes. Both, I think the first one will be short-term, and then they'll come with longer-term solutions closer to the end of the year.
Jesse?
I would say I'm hopeful, yes, but I'm not so optimistic as to think that all of our problems could be solved within the first year of the Housing Task Force.
Cautiously optimistic then?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you both. Well, speaking of that task force, it came to our attention in the newspaper that there was a bit of a tempest in a teapot about who was on the commission. It was appointed, the task force was appointed, and it appered that at least at the beginning they did not have any renters on there. Now, we've already learned tonight in the first panel of council aspirants that there has now been a renter appointed to it. Jesse, you aware of that? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. So I guess I'll have to amend my question and say, is one renter on the task force enough? Are we considering the needs of renters significantly or appropriately? And so that question goes to Mike first.
Okay. I think the task force even exists because of input from renters. So that series of housing forums that were held were mostly comprised of renters. And I think it was their feedback that actually drove the creation of the housing task force. For me, the issue is much more, do you need more input to define the need, or are you turning the page and ready to transition into solutions? And so if you had a dozen renters that had all developed affordable housing, I'd say, well, give me the dozen renters. All I'm looking for are people that have participated in the development process, that know the challenges, whether that's financing it, whether that's building it, or whether that's leasing it, because I'm looking for folks that have participated in that and can make meaningful recommendations to us. So I think, in a sense, we've defined the need, and having renter representation makes sense from a visibility perspective, a credibility perspective, but I really think the issue is, have everyone on the current task force participated in development of some type?
Okay, Jesse?
I would say that the fact that mostly renters brought forward the housing crisis resolution in the first place is strong evidence that there does need to be renter representation on that housing task force. I don't think one renter is enough on the entire task force, because that's not representative of the people of Fayetteville. I think you can look around and see that we have a large renters market in Fayetteville that cannot be fully represented by one person, because different renters at different socioeconomic levels face different challenges. And I think that it's important that the people who are most affected by our policies are involved in shaping those policies, so that we're not leaving anyone behind when we develop them. I think that if we're trying to build new housing, we're trying to make sure that we're setting regulations and policies forward for the housing market itself. We need to be making those with the people who are going to struggle the most in mind, because otherwise we're excluding an entire population from affordable life in Fayetteville.
Okay, thank you both. Next question goes to you first, Jesse. And this is a direct quote from a citizen who sent me this question. Our older neighborhoods are rapidly changing because of infill development. People feel less safe because of the increased traffic, and finding a place to park at home is increasingly difficult. How can the city help longtime residents in our older neighborhoods cope with infill caused parking shortage and traffic safety concerns? And that goes to you first, Jesse.
All right. I think we do have to get pretty creative when it comes to being a university town. We're going to have cars all over the place at different locations because there are events being hosted in our town, which I love. And I think when it comes to our older neighborhoods, people who are used to being able to park in certain places and are used to a way of life that they've had for a long time deserve their voices to be heard as well. I think when we're specifically looking at solutions for parking struggles, we're going to have to look at why everyone needs to drive everywhere in Fayetteville and whether or not we're truly making our city a walkable community. I think that looking at ways to make Fayetteville a more walkable or bikeable city, which we're already pretty progressive on, would be a good way of trying to alleviate some of that parking struggle, because we won't have as many cars moving around from place to place and taking up those spots that residential neighborhoods need for parking their cars at their homes.
Okay, Mike?
You know, parking is a commodity, and so if you're parking in the public right-of-way, you're making use of public asphalt that all of us own and none of us are entitled to. I think the challenge is both the expectation that people have that that's always available to them since they don't own it individually, but for me, it really raises the longer-term issue, which is if you're going to talk about parking minimums and doing away with them for residential, the question becomes, well, are you going to only lease to people that don't own cars or that will sign an affidavit that they're not going to have a car? Because when we talk about college students perhaps coming from a bordering state, but they've got a bike, well, that bike came here on the back of a pickup truck on a rack. So I don't call it parking, I call it long-term vehicle storage. And it simply doesn't go away because we don't want it to be here. So 2.5% of our residents bike to work. And that puts us in the silver standard. I mean, if you can get to 5%, you are the gold standard in the United States. That's part of what the trail system is about. But when I drive a new off-campus student housing project, I don't see vacant parking spaces. So where's this surplus of available parking that wasn't needed for our developments? So I think we're going to have to continue to say someone that doesn't live here yet doesn't have more rights than the people who already live here, and that balance is going to be necessary. And I think that balance regarding parking is just one more area in which we're going to have to strive for that balance.
Okay. Trying to get these questions in order where they sort of flow one to another. Here's one. What can be done to protect neighborhoods from being overbuilt with student housing by developers who are not affiliated with the University of Arkansas? And that would go to Mike first.
Well, they're all not affiliated with the university because they're going to build on the campus only. And thank goodness they're debating building 2 new dorms for 1,300 to 1,400 beds. So I think, again, what the community is asking us to do is to find balance. So it's that double-edged sword, isn't it? If you build off-campus student housing, you're displacing some of your existing housing stock. If you don't do it, those same students are going to be living somewhere in your community, absorbing the available affordable housing. They're going to consume that because of their need and the financial resources that they have because they have parents versus being 22 years old and in that first job. So the double-edged sword of that is if you build it and you can house 1,000 students, are you in fact saving potentially 250 rental units or single-family homes that then are available in the market for other people, more traditional renters to rent? And I think that the jury's out on that. There is no easy slam dunk answer. It's all going to be trade-off and nuance. And so that'll be Fayetteville's struggle. I mean, we had the fastest growing land-grant university in the nation for 13 years. So we went from 15,000 students to today 33,000 students. 6,300 live on campus, and 6,300 lived on campus 10 years ago. So there's your challenge in absorbing that. I don't say that to knock the university. Fayetteville wouldn't be Fayetteville without the university being here. And in fact, I think the money the city invested in getting the university here was one of the best investments Fayetteville ever made. We wouldn't be what we are without the university. But at the same time, the university has land, and we need them to participate with us in finding a means to house the people that they attract to come here. So when it's 33,000 students, it's about 6,000 staff and faculty, and those folks compete for 50% of the affordable housing in 3 zip codes in town. So it's not an easy answer.
Right, Jesse?
I think when it comes to student housing, we're never going to have enough because the university wants to keep expanding. So this is going to be something that we struggle with for the foreseeable future. And I know that a lot of our housing is built by out-of-state companies that don't have any stake in the city of Fayetteville. They don't have any reason to care about our community over their own projects that are built specifically for student housing. And if you look at the research surrounding housing in university towns across the country, this is a problem that every university city is facing. There are these real estate developers building these student-focused housing projects that aren't built to last, yet are taking up space in the community and are building housing projects that aren't necessarily there for the people who live in that city. And I think we need to be seriously considering what incentives we could be offering for local companies and local landowners for developing housing on their own property that could be used both for students and for residents of Fayetteville who live here year-round. And I think we need to be looking at how to make sure that that housing is something that will last and be part of the city for years and years to come, and not something that has to be updated every year after the spring semester ends, because it was built based on trends and fads in design and structure that don't necessarily hold up and remain sustainable for a long-term development.
Let's talk about zoning and the corridor plan that has been advanced to the city from the Planning Commission. That plan would put more than 600 acres along the highway through the middle of town, 71B, into a new zoning district. Now, the Planning Commission has voted to approve that by a vote of 6-2. The city, and of course, Mike, you're part of that now as a member of the council, and Jesse, you want to be a part of it, wants to beautify the corridor by adding trees and other improvements. Add sidewalks along both sides, put in covered bus stops, improve intersections, and add medians. The corridor plan would allow housing in the area. There's the jewel in the middle. The corridor has been a business strip for decades, zoned almost exclusively for non-residential use. So one goal of the plan is to ease the city's tight housing market. That's the topic under concern right now, under discussion. So much of the city's existing water and sewer service runs along that corridor. Allowing housing along the corridor, including multifamily development, would allow more housing without extending city utilities to new areas. So we're talking about expanding infrastructure and perhaps not needing it as much. So if this plan were to come to the council as it is in the final proposal, would you vote for it? And Jesse, you're up.
I think this corridor is an extremely important part of the community, and it's a place that people are spending a lot of their time in, as is, because so many of our vital businesses are there. And so whatever decision we make, we have to make it very carefully when it comes to the infrastructure surrounding this area. And I listened to the city planner talk about this at length in an interview. And I think when it comes to the infrastructure surrounding this corridor, we have to take into account when it was first established. Most of the infrastructure around Highway 71B was established just after World War II. And so that was a big expansion at the time. And a lot of these businesses were set up to be part of a more sprawling highway business design that was very popular back then. And so I think it's a good thing that we're reconsidering the different ways that we can use that land to benefit our community. But I definitely think that updating the infrastructure and making an investment on that end before we build these new projects onto the existing city are going to be necessary, because we need to make sure that whatever investments we make, they're things that we're going to be able to rely upon for decades and decades to come, just like we've relied on the existing infrastructure at this point.
Okay, Mike, you heard the presentation by the commission, I think, to council. So would you vote for it if it came up in front?
I wish I could vote for it tonight. It's going to be one of the most significant projects the city undertakes in our lifetime, and it's that critical and that important. We want to turn what was a state highway into a boulevard. Currently, housing is precluded from existing along the thoroughfare, and that's served its purpose when it was a state-owned highway, and it's not that any longer. Fayetteville invested in taking back that state highway to make it ours so that we could control both curb cuts, zoning, all of those kinds of things. So this is one of the most important places for us to develop dense housing. And I say that for 3 reasons. The first is it's already impervious area. You're not impacting, in essence, your stormwater management because it's already not soaking into the ground. The street used to be lined with maple trees, and they're already gone. So introducing trees for shade makes sense. The bus stops tend to be a sign where there is a sidewalk or a sign on a grassy knoll, and that's it. There is no shelter for folks that we would hope would use our mass transit. So by introducing the potential for the redevelopment of that space to include housing. And hopefully it would be mixed use with commercial below and as much housing as you want above. That would be the target, in my opinion.
All right, staying on the housing issue. Gentlemen, should the city council limit the height of new buildings to 7 stories or 10 stories or 14 stories or even higher? We'll let you put a number in there if you want to. Mike, you get it first.
Building height is already variable by zone. And so what's proposed for 71B, since we were talking about it, would be an 8th story height limit. We do have some zones that allow 13 stories, a very small portion of our downtown area. I know that if you're in a residential neighborhood backing up to one of these commercial thoroughfares, their concern is, well, wait a second, are you going to put 7 stories right behind my back fence? And that caused an appropriate amount of angst on people. But we have setbacks in our zoning code now that protects people so that you get 2 stories adjacent and then the building can go up. So I think it needs to remain variable by zone. I do know that when we look at downtown, and we'll be updating our downtown strategic plan in early 2025, what is walkable and what is human scale. And if you look at major cities, are people comfortable with 4 and 5 stories as opposed to walking beside an 8 or 9 story building? And I think for us, it boils down psychologically to sidewalk width. Do you give me enough human room to have trees planted, to feel the separation between me and traffic? And where that's possible, greater height is possible. Where you don't have the luxury of that, then I think you're looking at 3 to 4 stories human scale.
Okay, Jesse?
I also support the fact that we have variable housing limits or height limits on housing developments and other buildings built throughout our city. And I think, you know, you have to take into account the needs of our city, primarily housing. So when it comes to building on, say, 71B, where we have the opportunity to put a lot of new housing developments, I could see having a higher limit on the number of floors that a building could have, because that's a ripe opportunity for us to build a lot of housing opportunity for residents in the city. But of course, when it comes to downtown and other areas where people are spending most of their time walking or going to smaller establishments, it makes sense not to crowd those out. And so having a shorter or more limited amount of space available to businesses or companies that want to build in that area makes sense. We want to make sure that Fayetteville is changing and adapting to the changes that our city is facing. We want to make sure we're meeting the needs of the people who live here. But at the same time, we don't necessarily want to make Fayetteville completely unrecognizable. So those places like Dixon Street and the Square and the places where, you know, we're all very, very, the places that are all very personal to all of us, the places that we cherish spending our time. We don't want to lose that that value. We don't want to lose the safety and security that we feel and the welcome that we feel when we spend time in those parts of Fayetteville. But when it comes to more sprawling areas that are along highways or in more open spaces that have the opportunity for that, I think the higher limit makes sense.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. I'm going to combine a couple of questions here. So just sort of give you an A, B. And Jesse, this goes to you first. Recently, the city instituted limited water use for irrigation by individuals over in the eastern part of the city. So the question that arises from folks is, do we have an infrastructure problem? And then the follow-up would be, should the city of Fayetteville be selling water to other areas in view of that apparent problem?
I know that the city of Fayetteville is currently selling water to at least 2 other towns in our nearby vicinity. And I know that that is an issue that has been brought up multiple times by residents as we specifically are giving guidelines on how to responsibly use our water. I think as we see some of the early effects of climate change on our area, we're going to be thinking more and more about how we can responsibly and ethically steward our resources that we have in this community. And so I think while we may not necessarily have something that we would declare as a crisis for our infrastructure for water, I would say it's definitely something that we need to be examining very closely and looking at potential ways to effectively, efficiently, and affordably redistribute those resources in areas where we are lacking, because I do think that there are parts of our city that need more help in that department. And so when it comes to whether or not we have a responsibility to or an obligation to sell our water to nearby cities, I think my question would become, how do we support those cities that are nearby that do depend on us in becoming self-sufficient? How do we build sustainable infrastructure for them? How do we help them? What partnerships can we offer with our planning commission and theirs? How can we co-develop regional infrastructure that's going to be supportive of not just Fayetteville, but our surrounding cities as well, to make sure that everybody has a high quality of life and we're not just hoarding it here for ourselves?
Okay, Mike?
Water is the new oil, and people move here because it rains and we have water. And that's part of Leanne and I, when we moved here, that's a part of that answer. We lived through drought and serious water rationing. So infrastructure-wise, I think the challenge is we've been growing population-wise at 2.5% to 3% a year. And we just had a presentation from the Beaver Water District saying that yet our water consumption in the last 3 years has gone up over 7% each of the last 3 years. Previously, it was growing at 3% with the population. And so our consumption went up 21% in 3 years, and the regions went up 25% in 3 years, with very little explanation on, why, and we're not exactly sure. So yes, water infrastructure is going to be absolutely critical going forward. It's one of the most important things we can invest in. It's one of the main functions of government. So if we look at the health, safety, and welfare of our community, clean water is right up there. So I like to say that clean water, sewers, roads, and transit made New York, Paris, Rome, and London. And it literally is the engine that enables development and commerce to take place. So should we sell water? I think that decision was made long ago. The pipes already exist. Our surrounding communities pay an additional 2.5% more than Fayetteville residents, and I think that it's important that we continue to sell water to them. There's more than enough water. The issue is simply getting the infrastructure in place so that we can continue to grow. There is not a water shortage, however.
And that's good news for all of us. Glad to hear it. Mike, let's go to you for this next question. How do you feel about cooperative planning for the Northwest Arkansas region and our part in part of that region?
Yeah, Fayetteville is not an island. When you look at our region, we will sink and swim together. People don't just move to Fayetteville because they live and work here. Yes, that's a luxury when someone is here and both lives and works here. But the number of people that work in this dynamic region is, it just requires regional planning. I tell people, get in your car and drive today and appreciate it, because this is the best traffic that we'll have the rest of our lives. We have to begin to acknowledge that whether it's traffic, whether it's water, whether it's sewage treatment, whether it's dealing with homelessness, all of those are going to be regional issues. So just like we have a regional airport, we have regional medical services, we are going to have to become more cooperative and participative in regional planning.
Jesse?
I definitely think cooperative planning is going to be essential for the future of Fayetteville and the future of all the surrounding towns. I'm a teacher, so I see the way that cooperative planning works on a district level and the way that it works on a local level when schools work together to share resources and support each other's programs. So I definitely see that function being something that the Fayetteville local government has a responsibility toward as well, because we do have a lot of people who are already trying to meet needs in our community, and I know that our surrounding cities like Springdale, Bentonville, Farmington have people who are working and organizing to try to do that as well for their own communities. So I think there is a responsibility for us to connect people who are working on the same issues, to share ideas, to share resources, to make sure that we are doing all that we can to not overextend any one body because we're not willing to share with the entire collective. We're not willing to work together on our solutions. Yeah.
Okay. Next question, Jesse, goes to you first. Should the city police continue to clear out homeless camps, and should the no camping in the city ordinance be more aggressively enforced?
I think when it comes to the topic of homeless encampments, typically the question always revolves around, should we more strictly enforce that? And every time I see an encampment of people who are unhoused, my first question, just like it is with my students when I see them struggling, is what need is being unmet? What are we not doing to help these people? And I think there are people in the city of Fayetteville who are constantly trying to answer that question. I think we have a lot of really amazing organizations and really amazing work going on in our city who are people just trying to put themselves and their neighbors together to make sure that we're all meeting the needs of the people who live near us. And so when it comes to whether or not we should more strictly enforce the laws about outdoor living, I think that my question would be, are we doing all that we can on the front end to meet the disparities in available housing, in available health care that's affordable? We're talking about, are we making sure that people have some kind of community safety net or something in place to make sure that if you miss one paycheck, you're not out on the street because your landlord is capable of evicting you and putting you out into outdoor living immediately. I want to make sure that we are doing what we can to protect Fayetteville citizens first, and then we can talk about what it means to enforce outdoor living regulations.
Mike?
Boy, it's a tough issue, tough question. My best friend's brother was homeless for 25 years, a Vietnam vet, and so that hits home. He loved him. He didn't know where he was most of the time, and whenever he touched base with him, it was kind of a relief to know that he was alive. So it's a very human issue and a challenge for us. This is also one of those challenging enforcement issues, because imagine that it's your property that someone's camping on. So I think the Fayetteville Police Department does an exceptionally sensitive job of trying to individualize people and assess the situation. Are they a risk to themselves? Are they a risk to others? And so I trust their judgment on that. We know the courts have already ruled, and camping on public land is no longer kind of a sanctuary situation as it was before. Whether you agree with that decision or not, it's a decision that's been made. For me, this is one of those major regional issues, and that's because the Continuum of Care does their once-a-year overnight count. The same night, the entire nation counts individuals. So for me, the question becomes, when they ask the survey question, where were you last stably housed? 40% of the people in Washington County that were counted said, I last lived stably in Washington County. But 60% of the people in Washington, Madison, and Benton County were found and interviewed in Washington County, and the vast majority of those in Fayetteville. So the issue becomes, can you expect Fayetteville residents to be the sole community of compassion to support the needs of these individuals? And so this is one of those major, major regional efforts that I think we need to undertake.
Good. Mike, this goes to you first. It seems widely agreed, at least among developers in the area, that our city is not easy to do business with. Should the council get involved by directly addressing this with the city staff and the planning commissioners?
Boy, no. The staff work for the mayor, not for the city council. We're the part-time hired help. We're easily replaced. We deal with policy and the budget. And so that doesn't mean that it's hands-off, however. I mean, the question is, if we have the reputation, and when I ask people, I get the same answer, you know, hey, you know, it's a challenging place. It's all relative. We're more challenging than the communities to the north of us. And that's because we have a tree preservation ordinance and streamside protection. So when you talk to other Fayetteville residents and say, well, now, we could be like Springdale, and we could be like Bentonville, and the answer is, well, no, we really don't want to be like those. That preserving our clean water matters to us, preserving our tree canopy matters to us, and our residents are looking for balance. So when you say it's a challenging place, I would say absolutely yes, because those communities don't have streamside protection. They don't have the same tree preservation ordinances that we have. It still boils down to funding the engine that reviews plans and approves projects. And that's where I think we are underfunded and understaffed, to be perfectly honest with you. Time is money, and no developer worth their salt is not willing to pay their fair share. They simply are willing to pay when they're assured the service will be delivered for that which they're paying. And to me, that means staffing up in this particular important area.
Jesse?
I think when I hear that Fayetteville has a history or a reputation of being difficult to work with among business owners, my first question is, what kinds of businesses are saying this about us? Are these local business owners? Are these small businesses? Or are these corporations and people from outside of state who are trying to build a development or a singular franchise here? Because I think that when it comes to the city of Fayetteville, we all recognize we do want to preserve the quality of our local environment. We want to preserve the city as it is, and potentially even enhance the local environment if we can. So I'm not worried about that side of it. I have spoken with business owners in Fayetteville, specifically in Ward 2, who have talked about the lack of available information and resources that they have perceived as they've tried to get their businesses off the ground within the last year. And I think streamlining communication with new businesses is going to be an extremely important part of this, making sure that we're effectively communicating the necessary information at each step of business's entry into the community, and as it's trying to establish itself. And because of that, I do think that there is some need to examine the way in which our current city regulations are dealt with. The people who deal directly with these businesses, we need to ask them, like, what struggles are we having communicating these things? What struggles are we having getting things approved? Where is this stop coming in? What's holding these things up? Is it not enough people? Is there a more effective way for us to redistribute tasks? I want to speak with the people who are individually working on these tasks and let them figure out, okay, what are more efficient ways that we could handle this as a team, and what else could be added to our team to make us more capable of handling the tasks at hand?
Okay, gentlemen, we're going to squeeze in one more question before the closing remarks, and it's related to that one. The council, Mike, you're on it, delayed discussion on August 20th of a Fayetteville School District request to cut down century-old trees next to the high school to make way for a parking deck. So building the proposed parking garage would require an exemption to the city's tree preservation easement, which you've already spoken about, Mike. This question, however, goes to Jesse first. So would you vote for this easement if it came before you as a council member?
As someone who tries to park at Fayetteville High School every day, this does directly affect me. I do end up parking on the end of a parking row and not an actual space most days. So I definitely agree that there needs to be more parking available at Fayetteville High School, especially when you're looking at hosting events and trying to get out of campus at the end of a school day that now ends at 4:05, the same time that people are starting to get out of their jobs. That said, I don't want to see the centuries-old trees cut down. I don't want to see that release. I think we are very capable of building an existing parking garage on the parking lot that exists there right now. I don't think we would be able to fit as many spaces necessarily, but I do think that we would be able to build what we need in order for the school to continue to function properly and efficiently.
Mike?
I should have left before you asked this question. You know, for a community to even have this as an issue speaks to the caliber of this community. because I can assure you there are plenty of places in Arkansas where this would not even be a discussion, let alone a challenging vote. So I applaud the people in our community that embrace the urban forest, the tree canopy, and view those trees as almost, living residents that were here before us, and so they should be respected. And if you saw my inbox, and I've had to replace a couple of computer keyboards from the emails I've received from parents who are equally passionate. And there's a couple council members in the audience that will tell you these folks feel strongly that their child's safety is imperiled if they're driving around trying to find a place to park versus it being provided, that you would know this is not going to be an easy decision. So I think that the original part of your question was that the city council delayed this. And I hate to correct you publicly, but I have to say the city council did not proactively delay it. The school district contacted us and requested that we table this.
Robert, I think you said that earlier, didn't you? Yeah, okay, let's be correct on it then. That's
And
good.
so it afforded them the opportunity to come back with a revised plan, which has not been presented to city council yet. And so I think it'd be a little bit remiss to say, gee, I'm absolutely yes or no, not seeing what the school district is offering in their revised plan. I think it would be responsible to let them do that. But I've got to admit that, boy, I sure side with the trees.
Okay. So the article indicated that the matter will go to the September 17th meeting of the council to allow discussions between the district and the city to continue. So stay tuned, I guess is the answer on that one. All right, thank you both for answering our questions. We're going to let you finish up now with closing statements. And Jesse, you'll be able to go.
All right.
Let me make sure of that. No, I'm sorry. We're going to do the reverse of the beginning. So Mike, you would make the first closing statement, and then Jesse.
Thank you. If you're my age, you're going to say two things. With age comes wisdom, and that experience matters. And so I'm going to put a $3 bow on that 50-cent gift and tell you that experience really does matter. I've got municipal government experience. I've worked for 5 city managers and countless city councils. I've seen superior leadership and management, and I've seen problematic council members who didn't show up prepared, that caused staff in the community to be schizophrenic because they were so unpredictable in the way that they voted, the way that they viewed things. And so I took a vow that I might be wrong, but I'm at least going to show up on time, prepared to conduct the people's business. And so I don't show up to conduct Wiedeker's business. I show up to conduct the people's business. And so that 32 years is part of why I volunteered originally and got involved with the Environmental Action Committee, which I call the gateway drug to the city council, because everyone I know on city council started there. So service is the rent we pay for the space we take up. And that's literally how I got involved. I'm not flashy, I'm not glamorous, I'm an infrastructure guy, I'm a leadership fellow of the American Public Works Association. I believe that infrastructure is the future of our community and the most important asset that we have, because that's what will enable the growth that we want, the housing that we want. And the issue is, where can we get the most housing in return for every infrastructure dollar we invest? And that's why I'm running for re-election. Thank you.
Jesse, your comments.
I appreciate the chance to speak tonight, and I really appreciate the questions that were asked, because I think that they very much reflect the challenges and opportunities that our city is facing. I think the fact that most of these were housing points to the amount of growth that we're seeing as we've just reached the over 100,000 population marker. And I think as we continue to see this growth that seems to be exponential at this point, we are going to have to be creative about the ways that we solve our problems, and we're going to have to work together and collaborate on that. I think that plays to my strengths and where I'm comfortable. I spend a lot of my time monitoring and adjusting to what kids need and working with other teachers and with my kids on what they need. And so I look forward to potentially being able to collaborate with community members who are already trying to meet their own needs as well as the needs of their neighbors, to try to bring forward solutions that answer these problems, that address the changes that we're inevitably facing, and shape those changes into things that will be positive for our community. Because I think that Fayetteville is an incredible, incredible place to live, and I chose to live here for a reason. And I think that if we spend the next few years harnessing the growth that we have, harnessing the people who live here, who are already investing their time and energy and resources and even their money into this city, I think we're able to create a Fayetteville that is safe and affordable and accessible for all people for generations to come.
All right, folks, these are your candidates for Ward 2, Position 2 for City Council. I think they've done a good job. Gentlemen, thank you. Folks, thank you for coming. Those of you listening watching on live stream, you may find the links for these programs and these forums at the library social media and the Chamber of Commerce social media. Thanks again to the library for hosting us tonight and to Ozark Electric for being our presenting sponsor. This concludes the third forum out of our 5. Thank you.